Bill Gates said this, right? Time is the only thing that you can't get back. You can make more money, you can get more stuff. Time is something that you cannot make more of. The first thing that we do is sit down and make a list of everything they do for one episode. So just tell me, what do you do? Okay, I reach out to guests and I email them and I ask if they want to come on their show. And if they say yes, then we figure out a time. Then I add them to my spreadsheet. Then I create a Zoom link and I send them that. Then I create a Google Doc and I send them that. So we go through the whole thing, right? By the way, everything that I just said there could be done in one step, one automation. So from the moment I email a guest saying, hey, do you want to come on the show? If they say yes, I don't talk to them again. I don't do anything again until the day we record, because automation makes everything else happen.
Hi, this is Shubham Tiwari and I welcome you to the Fireside Chats. Our today's guest is a podcast and automation coach who helps coaches, course creators, and authors grow their podcasts into authority-building lead generators. He's the founder of Podcast Workflows, Joe Casabona. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So that introduction was rather short. So please tell us more about yourself and Podcast Workflows.
Yes. So I am a podcast and automations coach. I was a software developer for 20 years, but I'm very extroverted. I was in drama club all throughout grammar school and high school. And so I wanted an outlet for the entertainment and the conversation stuff. So I started podcasting a little over 10 years ago now. And my main show, How I Built It, is a primary income generator for me. It is fairly popular, a lot more popular than I expected it to be. And people started asking me, how do you do it? How can you help me? And so I decided to pivot into podcast coaching. The thing that I felt set me apart from other people who teach you how to launch a podcast or monetize a podcast is my ability to look at complex workflows and automate and delegate them. A friend of mine, David Hopper, said that it's like I'm playing 9D chess when I'm automating. So
Wow.
I thought I would combine those things, which led me to start my new newsletter and content site, Podcast Workflows, where I take deep dives into how people are producing their shows and what new and experienced podcasters can learn from that process.
Wonderful. So I'll come to some basics at the beginning of this interview. What are some of the basic inefficiencies that you see in most podcasts?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, I'll say there's two probably. One is the guest booking process, right? Even though scheduling links are a lot more common now than they were just a few years ago, I think people still do that, hey, when works for you dance, right? Like, oh, well, I'm good these days. Oh, I'm in the Eastern time zone.
Yeah.
And so I think that using a scheduling link solves a lot of those problems. It also, aside from just like preventing the time zone dance, it handles the communication and calendar invites as well. So you don't have to remember to email reminders to your guests. You don't have to remember to follow up or send them a calendar invite. Calendly and a lot of the other ones integrate with Zoom. Of course, I would also recommend you don't use Zoom, right? You use a tool like Riverside or Squadcast to make recording easier. And so that's, I think, the main inefficiency. And as far as a workflow goes, even the people who are using those scheduling links are not connecting them to some podcast planning document, right? So people will probably keep a list of their guests in a spreadsheet or Airtable or Notion or whatever. And when somebody books, the host will manually add that person to the spreadsheet or Notion or whatever. You can use Zapier or Make to automatically send that information over to the spreadsheet or Notion or whatever. Which, again, it sounds like when they book, I'll just add them, right? But that's something you don't need to remember to do anymore, right? It happens automatically. So I think that's the first kind of inefficiency. The second is with editing. And this is a tougher sell because I'm going to tell you one of two things, right? When you edit, you do not need to edit out every breath, and ah. That's just how people talk. You can't edit out your breathing in real life. You don't edit out every and ah in real life.
Right.
And so you don't need to do that. I think most people should hire an editor, right? Unless this is something that you want to do and like you love it, but most time is spent on podcasting in research and in the edit. And there are people who can edit your podcast for like $50 or less, US dollars wise.
Yeah.
And so taking that off of your plate will free up so much of your time. And if you don't believe me, just time track the next time you edit your podcast and see how long it takes you. And then think of all the things you could have done instead of editing your podcast, reaching out to a potential sponsor, reaching out to more guests, looking for affiliate programs, right? Things like that.
Well, we are guilty as charged when it comes to storing the information on Notion. So yeah, that's a note for us as well. Now, speaking of successful podcasters, we see this space dominated by American podcasters who are topping the charts everywhere in every country, right? What are the most common traits of these successful podcasters in terms of processes and systems? Because we don't see that, right? We just see the episodes.
Yeah, so I want to qualify success a little bit here, right? Because I think people are going to look at Joe Rogan and John Lee Dumas,
Lex Friedman, yeah.
Lex Friedman, Dak Shepard, and first of all, I just named 4 white guys, so sorry about that. Office Ladies, that's another really popular show, right? Amy Porterfield has a really popular show.
Yeah.
But the first few guys I mentioned, right? I want to qualify that that's not the success that we should try to emulate, right? Joe Rogan is in a league of his own. He can talk for 3 hours. He doesn't have to edit his podcast like most people. That's strictly a Joe Rogan thing, right? John Lee Dumas, people say like, "Oh, I'm going to charge guests to come on my show because John Lee Dumas charges to put people on his show." You're not John Lee Dumas, and that's like a smarmy thing anyway to do, right? Like you shouldn't charge to get also then free content that you're going to make money. Whatever. You're not John Lee Dumas, right? So I want to level set what success looks like. If your show is accomplishing the goals that you set out to accomplish, whether it's get sponsors, whether it's generate leads, whether it's have great conversations with other people in your niche, that's what success could look like for you. From an efficiency standpoint, I think it's doing only the things that you need to do, right? Because again, time, Bill Gates said this, right? Time is the only thing that you can't get back. You can make more money, you can get more stuff. Time is something that you cannot make more of. And so anything that helps you use your time wisely, right? Again, so I named Amy Porterfield, right? She has a process for her podcast. As we record this today, I released a podcast workflow with Christina Nicholson, the media maven, Become a Media Maven is her show. And her process takes her 30 minutes. It's a solo show. She picks a topic she knows extremely well. She creates an outline. She talks for 20 minutes, and then she hands it off to her editor and her assistant. And they do the rest. I do the same thing, right? I do some guest outreach, which is semi-automated because I do include personal notes, but like the actual emails that get sent out is an automation. They get a Calendly link that gets booked. We have a pre-interview and then we chat. I make some edit notes and I send it off to my team. The rest of that time allows me to spend the 8 to 12 hours that I spend writing the workflows. The 8 hours or so a week I spend reaching out and managing sponsors. The 8 hours a week that I spend building and promoting and making content for my membership. Right? So those last 2 things directly make money for me. And if I did everything myself and if I edited myself, I wouldn't be able to do those things. So the successful people are doing only the things that they need to do, which is Usually just talking. Most
Yeah,
podcasters, they just need to do the talking part.
right. And Joe, what do you mean by podcast automation? I understand that you have to delegate some aspects of it to focus on the main things. But how does, let's say, one person who's started a podcast, how can they start the automation journey?
Great question. So, yes, when I say automation, what I mean is having robots do things for you that you don't need to do, essentially.
Minions. Okay.
Yes. And so robots is a nebulous term here, but there are websites like Zapier and Make, right? A couple of years ago, people would have used the term no code for this, right? Now AI is like the belle of the ball. But it's using those no code tools to connect certain dots, right? So what I would recommend you do to get started today, this is something I do with all of my coaching clients when they hire, because usually they hire me and they're like, Joe, I'm spending too much time on my podcast. Help me, right? The first thing that we do is sit down and make a list of everything they do for one episode. So just tell me, what do you do? Okay, well, I reach out to guests and I email them and I ask if they want to come on their show. And if they say yes, then we figure out a time. Then I add them to my spreadsheet. Then I create a Zoom link and I send them that. Then I create a Google Doc and I send them that. Then so we go through the whole thing, right? By the way, everything that I just said there could be done in one step, one
Okay.
one automation, I should say, right? Um, so we identify everything they do, and then we put little check marks next to the things that they specifically have to do. This is probably outreach, right? If you don't like if you want to reach out to the guests yourself, I totally get that. I don't like relegate that to my VA. I do that myself. But like scheduling, creating the Google Doc, sending the call link, you don't need to do any of that. Then you need to talk. Great. Maybe you need to make edit notes because you were there, so you're going to be the person who knows it the best. Everything else, someone else can do. From editing down on to publishing, somebody else can do those things. And so then we decide, does a person have to do it or can a robot do it? Right. So in my case, my VA uploads the audio for my podcast and puts it on the website, right? A person has to do that.
Right.
Um, but let's go back to my example of create the call link, create the Google Doc, right? I have a Make scenario. Make is I'm going to call it a more affordable version of Zapier. It does just about everything Zapier needs it can do at a fraction of the cost. I love make.com. Not a sponsor, but if they want a sponsor, let me know. So that I have a form that people fill out. They fill out the form, they get kicked over to Calendly, they book the Calendly link, and then that information gets sent to Make. Over on make.com. I'm going to say make.com because make is like an actual verb. It's formerly Integromat, if you know
Right.
Integromat. Over on make.com, that information from Calendly gets taken and put in Airtable, which is my podcast planner. Then a Google Doc is created from a template. That Google Doc is then added to the Airtable entry, and the guest will get an email letting them know all of this has happened. All you've got to do now is show up on the day that we're going to record. So from the moment I email a guest saying, hey, do you want to come on the show? If they say yes, I don't talk to them again. Like I don't
Okay.
do anything again until the day we record, because automation makes everything else happen.
Right.
And I've done my research already, right? If I accept them on the show, I've done my research already. So
Of course.
it's not like I'm like just getting on the phone or getting on Riverside and being like, hey, so what should we talk about, right? I already know what we're talking about. I know that they're an expert in this because I've done my research before.
Right. Wonderful. So, Joe, recently you worked with Justin Moore of Creative Wizard. You did an audit of his new podcast. So, please tell us about your process of, auditing a podcast and what do you exactly mean by auditing a podcast?
Well, another great question. Nicely done. I'm really happy to hear this because, again, as we record this has just happened.
Yeah.
So with Justin, right, he joined my program Podcast Mastery, which gives people a call with me every quarter. Um, so for Justin specifically, we sat down, we had a conversation, we addressed a few important questions. With him, I actually already listened to his podcast. I was a guest on his podcast, so that was on my radar. When people pay for a podcast audit from me, these are usually the things that I'll do, right? So if it's new to me, we've not established a rapport, and I'm just kind of doing like a gut check on your show, I'm going to review all of the places where your podcast exists. I'm going to look at all the directories. I'm going to make sure you're in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube. I've got about 20 that I look through, because that's the first thing. If your podcast is not where people are listening, then you're not going to get more listeners, right?
Yeah.
Then I review the title, description, and artwork. So I like to look at the title to make sure that it's eye-catching, that it's descriptive of the show, that there's not a lot of competition. The description as well, people should know what they're going to get when they read the description. And then the artwork is like a book cover, right? So it needs to stand out in a wall of squares. And so there's a couple of ways you can do that. Then I review episode titles and descriptions. Again, I think too many people, like, here's a free tip for you. Stop putting the episode number in your title. Not you personally, but like people who are doing
Right.
podcasts.
Yeah.
That information takes up space. It's not relevant, right? Most people don't care what episode number it is. And it just takes up characters that otherwise would reveal better information, right? So for an audit I recently did, right, the title could have been episode 233 with Daryl Evans, right? But instead we changed it to Find Your Leadership Mind Shift,
Right.
lessons from an entrepreneur and coach. Great, now I know exactly what I'm getting. Same thing with the description. You can eliminate in this episode, right? Those are 3 words at the beginning of every episode description that you do not need. We know it's an episode. We want to optimize for that experience. Then I'll do three more things. I won't dive deep into these unless you want me to. But one is the call to action. I think too many podcasters have too many calls to actions. You should do really one or two. I have a hard time doing one, but you should pick the one thing you want your listeners to do. It should be join your mailing list. Then I'll critique your intro, because you have 60 to 90 seconds to keep someone's attention.
Right.
And then I find 5 podcasts for you to swap with, because podcast swaps are one of the best ways to grow your audience. That's a proven fact. There are going to be people who say, no, that's not true. It is. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a proven fact. I doubled my downloads last year from doing podcast swaps. So it's something that musicians do with an opening act. It's something that TV shows do with crossover episodes. It works. You are getting lookalike audiences.
Right. I'm glad that you mentioned that, Joe. Can you expand a little more on, podcast exchange, as well as, let's say once you have a very big guest, right? How do you, get them to post your podcast in their own community? That's a very big question.
Yeah, that one's tough. So let's do the swaps first, right?
Okay.
There are like four different ways to do podcast swaps, right? So there's a promo swap, right? So that's if you and I were doing a promo swap, I would read maybe some pre-written text that you gave me about the show. You would do the same for me, right? Maybe that's like a pre-roll ad. If you listen to like Amy Porterfield or Jay Klaus, anybody in the HubSpot podcast network, you'll hear them do this. They're going to plug other podcasts, right? This makes sense because the people listening to your podcast listen to podcasts. Next is a feed drop, right? And that's where we would each take a full episode and drop it in each other's feeds. So
Okay.
when I've done this, I will take the episode, I'll record my own little bumper at the beginning, say, hey, today's episode is special. It comes from the blah blah show. I really like this episode for XYZ. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, check out the show notes and subscribe to their show, right? But that makes it really easy because people are now they don't have to go anywhere to get the full episode, right? So that is a feed drop. And then there's a guest swap, right? So that's where you are each a guest on each other's show. And this allows you to really let your own personality shine while delivering value to their audience. This is a great way to get new listeners. And then you can also do a single crossover episode, right? And this is again, um, this is what like TV shows will do, right? Like in Friends,
Yeah.
famously, George Clooney and Noah Weil
Right.
and Helen Hunt, they were each in an episode
They
of
appeared.
Friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is when you and the host will record one episode and release it on each of your feeds for
Right.
each separate audience.
Right.
So that swaps. And then how do we get big guests to share?
Yeah.
Sadly, most big guests probably won't share, right?
Yep.
They're like acutely aware that maybe you
You
had
need
them
them. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're a big guest. But also, it's probably just they have a lot of stuff going on, right? They're sharing their own things. They recognize that they have a huge audience, and unless you give them a reason, right? If they talk about the same things on your show that they talk about with their audience anyway, there's no real incentive to share. So I will give a shout out to the Grow Your Show podcast by Deidre Shen of Cap Show here. She recently had a guest on named Kelly Moser, and Kelly gave some really good tips. This is like her specialty. And I took a bunch of notes, right? But um one is just have better conversations, right? If you know something the guest is always talking about, put a different spin on it, give a different angle, right? I mean, and then number one, maybe number zero, ask
Yeah.
for the share, right? They're not just going to share it, right? They might not even know when it comes out. So, at the very least, email them, say, "Hey, your episode's out. Thanks so much for your time. I would love and appreciate if you shared it." But there are more incentives, right? Have better conversations, right? Talk about something that maybe they haven't talked about with their audience, or put a different spin on it. That will incentivize them to share. Let them know to share when it's convenient, because some people, this is again, these are all Kelly's words here. Some people will think they need to share it the day the episode comes out, and if they're promoting something else, then they miss their window. I don't care if a guest shares my episode a month later, as long as they share it with their audience, right? I don't care about day one downloads. I care about downloads, right? More
Right.
importantly, I care about listeners. Um, the other thing that you could do, and again, this is Kelly's third and final idea here that I'm going to share, is if they don't want to share their episode, you could say, "Hey, thanks so much for coming on the show. I recognize that your audience probably has heard everything you've already talked about on the show, but they might also like this interview I did with so and so," right? So you can recommend other episodes for them to share. Then the
Hmm.
guest might
Okay.
say, "Oh, hey, I was just on How I Built It with Joe Casabona. We had a great conversation. We talked about my blah blah framework, which I talk about all the time here, but in episode 312, he talks about this adjacent concept, right? That you might also like." So, um, make it easy for them. Give them the words, even. Like, if I were to do that, I'd probably write the full email for them. They can just copy and paste it to their audience, right? You want to make it as easy as possible for guests to share your episode. And that's not just sending them images or sending them an audiogram. It's incentivizing it, and again, just making it as easy as possible for them to share.
Right. Right. And speaking of full episodes, I recently noticed that Jocko Willink has started to put only 15 minutes of his for episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast,
Mm-hmm.
and he's taking away his audience to his own website. So that's also something. I mean, what are your views on that? Like, should a podcaster have his own website or not?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in here. Yes, a podcaster should absolutely have their own website. I think this is I would contribute a lot of my growth early on to my website, because first of all, you're creating unique content, you're generating that SEO juice and driving traffic there. You can control the experience. And you can have other features or other things, right? You can have your own shop. I'm a WordPress developer, so I can stand up a WordPress site pretty quickly. Um, So like you can have a shop or a membership. But I think that you need a good place for your podcast to live.
Right.
Now, releasing only part of the episode in the directories in order to drive traffic to your website. I'm going to caveat this later, but I think that is user hostile. If you want people to listen to your podcast, you need to make it as easy as possible for them. So that means putting the show, the full free episode, in the directories. Don't
Right.
say, keep listening to this over on my website.
Right.
I can't imagine that their attrition rate is high for that. I
Yeah.
can't imagine it.
Yeah. I didn't go to their website. Yeah. I
I
didn't.
wouldn't either. I'd be like,
Yeah.
well, I guess I'm not hearing the rest of this conversation. On
Yeah.
to the next episode that's going to automatically play. Right?
Yeah.
Now, Sam Harris does this very effectively because he'll do a 45-minute episode and then make the rest of it members only. Right? And so that I think is a smart move. Especially if you have a big following, a way to monetize your audience without having to sell sponsors. I don't think he has sponsors. I think his show is fully listener supported, and
Right.
so that is a fine model, right? Hey, we're gonna have most of a conversation here. That will always be free, and you can listen to it wherever you want. If you want to get the entire conversation, or if you want to get a bonus conversation, or if you do
Right.
have ads, if you want an ad-free extended version, become a member over here and you'll get your own private feed, right? And
Yeah.
you'll get the full ad-free episodes. So I think that's fine. I think only giving an excerpt of your content in order to drive traffic to your website is user hostile.
Yeah.
And maybe it works for him. I don't think it works for anybody,
Right.
really.
The writer of The Last of Us, Craig Mazin,
Mhm.
he also runs a podcast called Scriptnotes. He also does that, what you said, like, like 90% of the episode is free to listen and the part of it is there. So, yeah, look, so now going back to, your work, Joe, could you share some, notable success stories of clients who have transformed their podcasts?
Yeah. So I have, let's see. A lot of my early wins were with getting people their first sponsors. And so they'll come to me, they'll say, I don't think I can get a sponsor for my podcast. And I always say, like, poppycock, you have a niche podcast, you can find a sponsor. And so those success stories are great to me because we'll meet a couple of times and then they'll just be ecstatic that they've made at least their investment back for the year. Right. Um, and so those are always fun. As far as podcast transformations go, those audits that I was talking about, the
Yeah.
one that I was reading off of, um, he made a bunch of changes to his show and has seen a positive impact on his downloads. Um, Someone I'm coaching right now, we're working through making improvements for her show. I'm giving her, we're kind of doing a whole bunch of things, but I'm helping her automate part of the show. I'm helping her with sponsors. I'm helping her with optimizing her show. And so she's really excited about that. The results to be determined, I would say at this point. And then one of my other coaching clients, she's doing great. Like she's making money, but she's overwhelmed and burned out. And so we've spent our time. I first taught her about automation, and now we are automating parts of her podcast and her workflow. And she's already seeing a return on her investment as far as time goes. So she's been able to take more stuff off her plate. She's been able to more smoothly hand things off to her assistant. And that sort of stuff really resonates with me because I really started doing all of this after I had kids. I've got 3 small kids. I
Wow.
had one small kid at the beginning of the pandemic, and then I don't know, it multiplied. And I'm trying to run a business, and my wife is a nurse, and so if I want to do that without just running myself ragged or ignoring my kids, I had to learn this stuff. And so that helping people get time back to spend with their kids, or just to go for a walk, or to not be stressed that they don't have an episode ready to go tomorrow. That's the stuff that really gets me out of bed in the morning.
Wow. Wow, Joe, you're making the world much more, beautiful because people have more time because
Yeah.
of you.
Well,
Great.
absolutely. That's my mission.
That's great. We fully support you on that. So, speaking of, growing a podcast, you just said that your number of downloads have, increased manifold. Is there any cheat code? Can you share with us?
You got to put the work in. I mean, I guess paid ads could be a cheat code, right?
Okay.
You pay for traffic, but I would recommend that if you're going to invest an appreciable amount of money, you do it on the content production side of things first.
Right.
So it's really about doing that outreach, finding people to do swaps with, going on other people's podcasts, um, and creating good content that people want to share. Right? I mean, like that's like a very rote thing or whatever. That's like a very cliche. Just make good content. It's not that easy anymore,
Yeah.
but getting yourself in front of other people's audiences, that's the thing, right? You're going where people are. I'm an elder millennial myself, and I love Blink-182. They've been my favorite band for 20 years.
Right.
And when they got back together, my brother and I immediately bought tickets. And the opening act was Turnstile. I had never heard of Turnstile before. But you know what? They put on a good show. They brought it. They knew what they were doing. They were opening for like one of the biggest rock bands in the world. And they really brought it. And you know what? I'm checking out Turnstile now. So if you want to get more listeners, find podcasts in your niche who talk to the same people that you talk to. Pitch yourself as a guest or pitch yourself on podcast swaps. It takes work, but the results justify the time you put into it.
Wonderful. As a podcast coach, what strategies do you recommend for effectively leveraging a podcast to build thought leadership and generate leads?
Yeah, this is great. I think a lot of people think they have to do interview podcasts. And I'm not ripping it, because I have an interview podcast. But I think the thing a lot of people don't realize is that it doesn't just need to be interviews, right? Because when you do an interview, and rightfully so, you're putting the spotlight on your guest. They're taking time to talk about, they're taking time out of their day to talk to you to create good content for you. So what I would recommend is pepper in some solo shows there.
Okay.
And leverage your expertise, right? And I guess the first thing, step one, is have a podcast in your area of expertise, right? I'm not going to have a podcast about cigars, even though I love cigars, because I
Good,
don't.
good for the optics.
Yeah. Very controversial topic, first of all,
Yeah.
but also my business has nothing to do with cigars, right?
Right.
And I want to keep it that way. That's a hobby. I don't want to turn it into a job. So first, pick a podcast where you are the expert, right? And then you can show off your expertise and build your authority by doing solo shows. I think a mini podcast is just the best thing right now. Again, Christina Nicholson, she has a mini podcast. It used to be interview focused. Now it's a mini podcast where she talks about her area of expertise. So you're creating content. And the beautiful thing about that is that a podcast can then become lots of other pieces of content, right? You can
Yeah.
turn it into a blog post. You can turn it into a LinkedIn post or a Twitter thread. You can turn it into, if you have your video on, which I recommend you do, even if you don't release the video in full form, have it on, and then you can release clips on TikTok and Instagram, right? And for generating leads, here's the important bit. You want to provide value, right? So you have a mini episode. I have a mini episode. I have a mini podcast called The Profitable Podcaster. Now I'm promoting podcast workflows, right? But for a while, I would have 2 or 3, maybe 4 different opt-ins. And so my call to action would be based on the topic. If I'm talking about automation, hey, I'm going to talk to you for like 20 minutes today about how you can start automating your podcast. If you want to get a head start, check out my free automations library over at this link, right? Now people say, oh, well, I'm interested in this topic. You have a free resource that's going to provide even more value. Yeah, I'll trade my email address for that. And then that gets you to a point where, because people can skip episodes, right? But if
Yeah.
you're showing up in their inbox once or twice a week or every day, some people like email every day. It's a lot of work. But if you're showing up for them in multiple places every week, they're going to start to know, like, and trust you. And when they are ready, when they say, oh man, I definitely need to start automating more. Well, Joe's the automation expert, so I'm going to reach out to him. So it's a long play, right? When you plant seeds on Monday, you're not going to have trees or vegetables on Tuesday.
Right.
But in a month or a couple months, actually, this is probably a tangent. I hope I'm not going on too long, but one of my favorite podcasts right now is History Daily. It's a daily a Monday through Friday, something that happened on this day, right? And yesterday's was Big Ben starts telling time, right? Big Ben turns on, right? And I think it was something like 25 years from, maybe it was like 15 years from when they decided to rebuild the castle, the property that burned down. From that time, they decided to rebuild it with a clock to when the clock actually started telling time was like 15 years.
Wow.
Imagine somebody today going like, oh yeah, I'm going to start something today and it won't be done for 15 years. That's wild, right? I'm asking for like 3 months, and that feels too long. So just remember that. You plant seeds today and they will flourish into a beautiful flower that wants to hire you. But don't expect the sale tomorrow.
It's a long journey, and we are glad to have you, Joe, on our side, the podcasters. Thank you so much for doing whatever you're doing, and thanks for coming on the show. Last ritual we make our guests go through. Would you like to nominate anyone for the show?
There are a lot of really great people doing really cool things right now. My favorite person doing really cool things right now is Chenell Basilio. She has a newsletter called Growth in Reverse, where she does, I just mentioned how I spend like 12 hours doing my deep dives, right? She spends 25 to 30 hours every week reverse engineering how a creator built their mailing list to 50,000 plus subscribers.
Wow.
It is my Sunday ritual. I get her newsletter, I get a cup of coffee, and I read it, and I learn so much. In fact, podcast workflows came from, like, that idea came from her newsletter. So I can't recommend her enough. I think she's amazing. Chenell Basilio.
Wonderful. We learned a lot of things from this episode. So please tell us about your favorite bit from this episode. Reach out to Joe on Twitter. You can find his work everywhere. And yeah, Joe, thank you so much. Thanks again for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. This is great.
And cut. That's it for today's episode, guys. If you really liked it, please subscribe to the Thousand Faces Club and press the bell icon below so that you don't miss any videos from us. Thank you.